I'm Craig Markovitz. I'm on the faculty here. I teach entrepreneurship and innovation. I'm also an entrepreneur in residence here in the Swartz Center. I've met with a number of you already about your plans for world domination. That's why I'm here, is to try and help you execute on those plans for world domination. I came out of industry. I've been at Carnegie Mellon now 8 years, which is crazy that it's been that long. But before that, I was an entrepreneur, started companies, worked in venture. Just as many of my colleagues and all the folks here in the Swartz Center, we bring real world experience to the concepts, to the ideas, to the advice, trying to help you be successful. Again, execute on your goals, however you define success. That's why we're here. And so it's always a pleasure for me to do this talk and talk a little bit about the business model canvas, because as Shiv said, he and I met yesterday, and one of the takeaways was, well, geez, you should do a business model canvas, right? And as luck would have it, I'm giving a talk today on business model canvas. And so it's not as if I was artificially trying to drive up attendance. It's actually a tool that we recommend, that we use, that I've used personally, that many of the entrepreneurs and students and projects that we've worked on over the years use tools like the business model canvas to actually provide framework and discipline and strategies and direction as you think about your ideas and you think about getting to market, you think about making these things real. So what we're going to do today is actually physically walk through the business model canvas, spend a little time on each of the points, right? Each of the building blocks. So talk a little bit about technically what it is and how you can use it to benefit you, and a little more about sort of strategy and how it's beneficial, and how tools like the business model canvas and places like the Swartz Center and the network like Carnegie Mellon can give you an unfair advantage to be successful, right? Because that's what we're doing here. Again, we are exclusively here to help you build companies, ideas, concepts, teams consistent with your vision and your definition of success. That being said, I am a relatively informal person. So if you have a question or a comment, or you disagree with something I say, raise your hand, interrupt. I'm fine with that. A little healthy dialogue and discourse, I think, is always good in these types of environments, because we're not talking about finance, right? Or accounting. Like, there's no definitive answer here, right? All of these strategies are guide rails to help you move down that path of commercialization, right? In a meaningful way. Hopefully you won't make some of the same mistakes that we've made, right? But this isn't gospel, right? You take these tools, you modify them, you use them in such a way that's beneficial for you, okay? So that being said, oftentimes when we think about a business, right, we think about the product or service. We think about what we're selling, right? And as long as you have something that's pretty cool, that's capable, right, that you can market and sell, like, isn't that enough? Right? Why do you need to think about all the other aspects of the business, right? If you have an amazing product or service or offering, right, isn't that enough? And it's the old cliche, right? I've built a better mousetrap and the world will be the path to my door. And that is very rare, if ever, a situation that occurs, right? So if we think about sort of a product, right? And you all know what Rosetta Stone is? It's a language learning company, right? Been around for a long time. And they were very novel in how they promoted their product, right? So if someone wants to learn another language, they could go to Rosetta Stone, could find these kiosks at the mall or at the airport or wherever, right? You could buy these tapes and follow their curriculum, kind of pricey, but you could learn a second language. And that was sort of the gold standard, right? So they had a product that was effective to help folks learn a second language. Then something else came along, we may or may not be familiar with here, that completely disrupted the delivery, the entire model around how people learn another language, right? And so it's a great example to think, if your goal was to learn a second language or another language or improve your language skills, right? There's a number of choices. And so Duolingo didn't invent or create or really do anything novel relative to the concept of learning a second language. It was how they structured it, how they delivered it, how they promoted it, right? The sense of community that they built, right? And obviously very successful. I'm sure you're all familiar with IKEA as another example. And they completely changed the sort of shopping and the purchasing of furniture, right? Because before IKEA, when you went to buy decent furniture, you would go to a furniture store and you'd look around in the showroom and you'd sit in everything, you try it out, and then you would find something you like and you'd order it, and then 6, 8, 12 weeks later, it would show up at your house. Now, IKEA came along and you could go and do exactly that. You could take it home that same day, right? And they had innovations around sort of the boxes, the flat packing, right? They're really well detailed and thought through instructions for putting the furniture together that no one has ever had a problem with, right? But so they took an industry, right? Which again, decent product, right? Finding a couch or a table or a bed or whatever type of furniture you want to buy, right? To satisfy your needs, right? But they completely changed everything around it. Incredibly successful, right? So again, sort of thinking through, is having a great product or service or offering enough? It's important. And some of the early work we do in terms of thinking through that customer problem solution hypothesis that Shiv mentioned, and some of the other strategies that we use to validate whether you actually have something that solves a problem for customers in a meaningful and differentiated way, so they'll pay you for it, right? Is where we think about validation of the product, right? Which is an important step. But then we need to think through all the other aspects that contribute to whether or not your effort, your endeavor will be successful. So Don Jones is sort of the inventor of entrepreneurship here at Carnegie Mellon, and his quotes are all over the place. I know Dave's fond of a number of them and has them in his office, and but this is absolutely true, right? So how do you think about simplifying, creating discipline and a methodology to take your idea, your concept, your product, your service, and put some parameters around it so you can think intentionally around, what do I need to do to make this real, right? How do I get it to market? How do I produce it? How do I distribute it? How do I ensure that the juice is worth the squeeze, right? That there's actually profit to be made, right? And you can think about that from a global perspective, and you can sort of try to piecemeal it together. Or you can think about using a framework that will actually guide you and provide you with the discipline to make sure that A, you cover all of the important functional areas that you need to cover, right? And B, that you visit it and you work intentionally on your strategy to make sure that you're evolving towards market success, company success, again, whatever you collectively and individually define as success. So essentially, we can look at the business model canvas as your internal business planning guide, right? So if you think about the materials that you create when you're starting a company, you have your external collateral, right? Whether it's your marketing material, your product sheets, your investment presentations, like your website, all the things that you use externally to promote the business, to try and build something of substance, right? And all that's really important. But what do you do internally, right? To make sure you're being efficient and effective as you build that strategy, right? And so the most simple way to think about your business model canvas is it is for you as the entrepreneur, for you as the founding team, for you as the key employees in a business, right? Thinking about, what do we do every day? What guides us? How do we prioritize our time? How do we allocate our resources effectively, right? And having a structure for internal planning, for internal strategy, for internal discussion will put you in a better position to be successful. And that's what the business model canvas does. So this is a quick video to give you an overview of what it actually looks like, because I suspect that there's a number of you here today that aren't familiar with the business model canvas. So we're going to watch this overview video. It goes very quick. Don't worry about it. It just gives you a sense of what this thing looks like. And then we're going to dive into the building blocks individually and spend a little time with each of them.
Business model can be described with 9 basic building blocks: your customer segments, your value proposition at each segment, channels to reach customers, customer relationships you establish, the revenue streams you generate, the key resources and key activities you require to create value, the key partners, and the cost structure of the business model. But it's not sufficient to just enumerate the 9 building blocks. What you really want to do is to map them out on a pre-structured canvas. This is what we call the business model canvas, a tool that helps you map, discuss, design, and invent new business models. Let's briefly go through the new building blocks, starting with the customer segments. These are all the people or organizations for which you're creating value. This includes simple users and paying customers. For each segment, you have a specific value proposition. These are the bundles of products and services that create value for your customers. Channels describe through which touchpoints you're interacting with customers and delivering value. Customer relationships outline the type of relationship you're establishing with your customers. The revenue streams make clear how and through which pricing mechanisms your business model is capturing value. Then you need to describe the infrastructure to create, deliver, and capture value. The key resources show which assets are indispensable in your business model. Key activities show which things you really need to be able to perform. The key partners show who can help you leverage your business model, since you won't own all key resources yourself, nor will you perform all key activities. Then once you understand your business model's infrastructure, you'll also have an idea of its cost structure. So with the business model canvas, you can map out your entire business model in one image. This works for startup entrepreneurs just as well as for the most senior executives.
Okay, so I'm probably just done. Right? Video's cool. I'll get out of here early. No, but it is literally a canvas. Okay, broken up into these 9 building blocks, which again we're going to dive into. And this is an active, dynamic document. There are plenty of examples of companies and folks in our garages where you see one of their whiteboard walls will be covered with a giant business model canvas, and they're constantly changing and moving ideas and strategies and reprioritizing, because each of these, they're important, and you learn more about your customers and you learn more about what you can charge and how you're going to distribute the farther along you go, right? The more you get out of theory and into practice, priorities change, strategies change. So this is not, back when I was in school, there was no business model canvas. There was no sort of focus on an investment presentation and some of the tools that we use today. It was all about writing a business plan. So I spent an entire semester writing an 80-page business plan on whatever crazy, stupid idea I had back then. And that was the norm. It was when you went to talk to investors and you went to try and do something with your business, the first question folks would ask you is, where's your business plan? And you'd yank out this 80-page thing and throw it on their desk, and they would never read it. And the second that you finished writing it, it was completely obsolete, right? And it was just an absolute waste of time, right? And I even got a B- on it. I put all that effort in, and I only got a B-, which kind of sucked. But the philosophy has changed. So having a dynamic document that can essentially address the important issues that we addressed back in the day in those giant documents that nobody read and that were completely obsolete by the time you finished it. This is the new and better way to do it, to provide you with the value that you need to be successful. So think about this not as a static document that you just complete and just check a box and file it away. This becomes part of your culture. This becomes part of your business and your strategy to address the building blocks and to think about the points and to use inputs and to change your priorities and think through what are the strategies that are going to put you in the best position to be successful. We use a similar tool. So before Carnegie Mellon, I was in medical robotics. I took a company that actually started here across the street in Newell Simon Hall and built a business around it. And all on the way, we used a tool similar to this, where everyone was engaged. It was literally on the wall in a conference room, and we would have meetings, and that's how we would work through it was a medical device. What were the procedures we were going to target? What were the suppliers? What did they look like that we needed? Well, hospitals, surgeons, all the people that and all the touch points that were critical to the success of the business, right? Wasn't in a giant document that no one read, but it was actually out there for all to see. And it worked, and it was effective. But you'll notice that it's intentionally structured this way, with the green blocks being your external facing, your customer, things that affect and impact the business from a customer perspective, and the red is more your internal. your operations, your allocation of resources, some of your other requirements, right? So it's not an accident that it's set up like this, right? So as we think about addressing the blocks and diving in and understanding the relevance and importance of each one, right side, customer, external, outward focused, red, internal, or more strategic around the operations of the business. Okay. So let's think about customer segments. Very important. Again, the order also isn't accidental. Right? You have to understand your customer. And this is usually where I start in my discussions with young companies and entrepreneurs that are trying to figure things out. Right? Think about your customers. What do they look like? What are the demographics, the psychographics? What markets are they in? Right? What size? What stage of development? Like, who are your customers? And you will have multiple customer segments, likely, right? And the trick is to identify them in such a way that you can understand their personas, right? Understand their problems and solve their problems for them in a unique and valuable way so they'll pay you, right? Because that's the goal, is to get paid. And so the customer segment block is a great place to start. And it's really important to understand who values your offering, right? Who's most likely to give you time and attention? Who's most likely going to purchase from you? And the key is to prioritize customer segments, because one thing is for sure, and I don't care who you are, from Luis von Ahn all the way on down, your resources are limited, right? Capital, time, expertise. And so you have to think about, where do I devote my time, energy, effort, and resources in such a way to maximize impact on the business, right? To make the business more real and less risky. Well, if you understand from a prioritization of your customer segments, who needs you the most? And that's where you start. It might be the biggest market. In fact, it probably isn't the biggest, right? But you want to get that connection, that positive feedback. I always like to say to folks, like, picture you're walking into a room and someone's hair's on fire and you're holding a fire extinguisher, right? Like, you become the most important person in their lives by far. So which customer segments, right, consider you to be the most important person to them, most important company to them? And this comment about detail really matters, right? And these are tips. And how do you think about segmenting your customers? What are the characteristics? And they're not the same for everybody. The characteristics that mattered in my medical robotics company will be different, right, than characteristics that matter in your business. So it's really important to think about the customer segment, because that's the only reason that you're here. It's the only reason that you're in business, right? What matters to you does not matter. It's what matters to the customer. And we sometimes, there will be a tendency on this illustrious campus to fall in love with our solutions, right? To fall in love with our technology, and lose sight of the fact that we're building these things for someone else, not for ourselves, if you want to build a business. So take your biases, take your priorities out. Think about your customers. Think about the segmentation of your customers in terms of who really values what you're offering. Okay? And that dovetails nicely into the value proposition. There has to be value there. And those of you that have taken lean entrepreneurship, or that have hung around some of our other talks, or will get more engaged in some of our curriculum and some of our strategies here, we have a concept called the goodness factor, which talks about like how you can provide value to your customers in such a way it's meaningfully and measurably better than the value they're getting from current solutions. And we look for multiples of improvement, right? So what you do not want to create is a nice to have solution for people, right? You want to look and focus on must-haves. And how do you determine whether it's a must-have or not? What kind of value does your customer get from what you're bringing to them? How acute is the problem you're solving? So they prioritize you and your solution. And you think about the value proposition, that's what it is, right? There's nothing in here that talks about what matters to us as the entrepreneur, as the company owner, as the product owner. The value proposition is exclusively focused on how does your customer derive, determine, feel value from you, right? And this will be available on our website. So all this stuff will be there for your reading pleasure. We're obviously always around and happy to dive into some of these things, but we have learned lessons over the years, right? And so thinking about how you quantify the value proposition is critically important, because it goes back to that prioritization piece, right? If there's a problem that is causing your customers extraordinary pain in time or money, stress, strain, and you understand what the effect of that is, and you can solve it for them, you're on your way. Next is revenue. A little bit about revenue. I'm just going to buzz through these because you all can read, right? So again, goes back to that, what matters to us as the company, as the entrepreneur, it doesn't matter. People will pay if they get value, right? And the mistake that we make as entrepreneurs, and I made it back in the early days, and those of you that are running companies or have been in and around the world, we lead with the revenue and immediately we want a discount. I'll cut my costs, right? Which a lot of times is the wrong strategy, because very rarely is it exclusively cost that's driving the decision of your potential customer. If they get value, if you're solving problems for them, they'll pay. So you want to think about revenue, not just from the perspective of like, what can I charge? And do I need to reduce? Am I charging too much? It's about, by the time you get to understanding what you should be charging and what your revenue model looks like, you should have a good understanding for the benefit, the value that your customer derives from working with you. Right? I mean, think about on a daily basis the decisions that you all make, how you spend your hard-earned dollars, right? Sometimes it's price-driven. More often than not, there's other factors that contribute to your ultimate decision, right? So, and there's just so many different ways to price. And, again, kind of going back into some of our concepts around how we help people build companies and solutions. Doing that customer discovery, actually getting out there and talking to people, will give you a line of sight to what pricing looks like. One little thing that I've learned the hard way over the years is a lot of times we'll jump into industries where there already is a structure for around your competitors or around how people charge. A lot of times it's to our benefit to think about ways to slot ourselves in, because coming up with completely new and creative and different pricing models is another thing you need to educate your customer on, just another potential obstacle you need to overcome. As you think about building your business, commercializing your technology, offering your products or solutions, it's all about understanding and anticipating where the no's are going to come from and overcoming those no's, right? And so slotting into revenue models that your customers are comfortable with is an easy way to get through this discussion, because then you can focus on the value, right? You can focus on the return for them rather than having to explain a complicated, novel pricing structure. Talked about the goodness factor. I think that'll be for another talk. Folks will talk about that down the road. So I'll just tease you with the goodness factor. Really important and effective way to think about your pricing, your product you're offering. I gave you a little hints to it, right? Actually, I'm going to just real quick, this number 3, this not getting hung up on the details. It just as a quick aside, that's really good advice for all of this. I think sometimes, particularly here on this campus, we strive for perfection. We want to have all the answers, right? We want to get all the details together, and that's just counterintuitive to what entrepreneurship is. You have to take a leap of faith. You have to try to do some things with imperfect information. I can guarantee you that whatever journey each of you is going to take as entrepreneurs or innovators, whether it's in your own company or within a larger enterprise or doing something in the not-for-profit world, whatever structure you build, whatever journey you take, it's going to be unique to you. And you're not going to have all the answers. And so I'm continually pushing for you all to get out there. Just try it, right? Don't wait for perfection, because you will make mistakes, and that's okay. Very rarely are those mistakes catastrophic. It'll be better for the experience. So if you get to the point and you build a robust business model canvas and you understand your customer and your market, and you have an offering that you think folks will value, and you can substantiate the return that you can provide to your customers, just go do it. Figure the rest of it out later, okay? So don't get hung up on the details, right? Don't seek perfection. Sometimes, and I think we're less guilty of it here in the Swartz Center than in other places on campus. but I think there's this constant journey, right? And perspective that everything has to be just right. And that's definitely not the case here in entrepreneurship. Okay, so we're 3 blocks in. We know who our customer is. We have a good sense of sort of the value that we bring to them, right? And like we have to understand if we can charge for it, right? Many years ago, I had a postdoc in here who was had this really cool idea in technology to put sensors on coolers in grocery stores and convenience stores to help with temperature modulation and to create efficiencies around energy use. And so he would put these sensors. He actually had it set up over in the Cone Center, and it was actually really cool and worked very, very well. And we went through everything, and I asked for his thoughts around his revenue, and he put out this model, and he showed me this model that in his wildest dreams, if everything went perfectly according to plan, in 3 years, he could have $120,000 in top line revenue for the business. And I just kind of looked at him and I was like, nothing. First of all, things don't always never go perfectly. And by the way, in 3 years, you can only get 120,000 in top line revenue. Is this really a business? Right? So we have to understand that piece, right? That scalability piece. Is there substance there? And there's nothing wrong, particularly as you're here at Carnegie Mellon with working through exercises that create value for you and provide you with experiences, right? But it's not a business. So who's your customer? How do they value what you're bringing in terms of solving problems for them so they'll pay you? And is there a line of sight to substance from an economic perspective? We can't ignore it. So that's where we are, right? So we understand some, but we don't understand all. We need to buzz through sort of the rest of the canvas, right? And we're still on the green side, right? We're still on the customer side. It's all about your customer. Again, like we need to focus on the customer. We need to focus on the problems and the needs of your customer. So again, you're all more than capable of reading, but how does your customer perceive you? How do you connect, right? How do you create those loyalties, right? What does your customer think when they think of you? All of this matters because it's costly and risky to acquire customers. It's difficult to maintain and preserve those customers, and leveraging that into additional customer relationships so you can scale the business, right? And we can rename the Swartz Center after you someday because you'll top Jim Swartz's donation, right? Your relationship with your customer is going to matter, right? Channels, how do you get it out? How do you distribute? And a lot of the things that we do here are tech-driven, right? Software-driven, and there's very efficient ways to distribute and scale. But there's a lot of product, there's a lot of hardware, there's many other factors that contribute to how we get our solution into the hands of our customer. And you need to think about that. Because even if it is something that's electronic, right, you're going to use just the internet and do everything virtually, there's still many, many challenges around how you deliver, how you're reliable, how you're effective, how you're heard, right, among all the noise. In some ways, life is easier as you think about launching new endeavors. In some ways, it's more difficult. Yeah. Do you have a question?
Start answering these questions before the start of your company or during the process of once we have started, once we give speech or if reaching the people and then question ourselves and answer everything, prepare a strategy and going it forward. Like, how often do you have to question ourselves or prepare this whole?
Yeah, so for those online, I think the question is, when do you start to think about this, right? When do you start to employ the strategy? When do I just mentioned earlier how precious your resources are. You're going to expend limited resources on this particular block. So it's a very good question, right? And again, it's nuanced based on the nature of what your company does or will do. But when we start this, and my advice is just to at least put your preliminary thoughts down now, right? So if you all have ideas that you're thinking about or that you're working on, or you're trying to put a team together, and you start to frame out like each of these building blocks in such a way, right? It'll be early. It'll be a very preliminary hypothesis, because you may have a vision early on for how you think you would distribute and who you would work with and what that looks like. And then once you dive into actually talking to the customers, talking to the market, actually doing it and trying it, right? Running those MVPs, running those pilots, trying to figure out how to actually get your product or service in the hands of your customers, it's highly likely, if not a certainty, that your original early hypothesis will be incorrect, but you'll go back and change it. And that's why this idea of having the business model canvas visible and dynamic is really important, because almost on a daily basis, you will change these, right? So I think you need to start somewhere. And even though, as we said earlier, you don't know what you don't know, you have an early sense. So you start with that as your anchor, and then you execute, and you get out there and you try. Which again is really important. We're not going to stay here and plan and hide behind our laptop screens. We want to actually get out and do these things, get active, and you'll make changes as you go. I want to make sure that we stay on time. Key activities, again, limited resources. So, the way I've positioned key activities is, and I was just talking to a group earlier today. So we know what the current state of your idea or your business is, right? So you know what it looks like today. So what is the next meaningful step in this business? Where is that inflection point where you're going to get exponential value? And you think about value in terms of risk reward. When you're early, you're as risky as you're ever going to be. And it's really hard to have line of sight or to articulate or to promote the idea that working with you as a customer, supplier, employee, investor is going to provide benefit. So the risk is high, the potential reward, as you can define it, is low. And your job as entrepreneurs is to use tools like the business model canvas to make progress down your commercialization strategy to become less risky and more fruitful, have line of sight to returns. So when you think about key activities, you prioritize based on what is the current state of the business? What's the next milestone? What's that next inflection point where the business looks different, where it's perceived as actually physically more real, less risky? What does that look like? All right, how long and how much to get there? Right? And then you can start to think about the resources you need, the people, the talent, the relationships, the money. And so prioritizing key activities, really important, because there's so much to do. And I can tell you from experience, so much to do. How do you decide? How do you triage, to use a medical term? How do you decide where to spend your time? It's all about that risk mitigation. It's all about promoting upside, right? And you prioritize your key activities based on what's going to make this more real, what's going to make this less risky. And then you'll be completely wrong and you'll have to go back and redo it. At least that's what happened to me. What do you need? It's a lot more than just money. And we have all sorts of talks and conversations and experts and people to talk about fundraising and strategies and what the business needs to look like and what's appropriate from a stage of development. What's the structure, right? And all these things really matter because you do need money. We all need money, right? But there's more to it, right? And then there's the talent, there's the in-kind, there's the relationships. There's so much you can do here with the resources that are available to you, being scrappy and creative, right? But understanding the resources that you need to execute, critically important. And you're not going to have them. Like, you've got your ideal money and people, and it takes time and it's hard and it's challenging, and you have to sort of beg, borrow, and steal your way to the best outcome you can possibly get to. But understanding those resources, it matters, right? Ties back into that. What do I need to do as a business to become more real and less risky and get line of sight to becoming something substantive and scalable? How long and how much, right? And the how much is more than just the money, right? It's the people, it's the relationships, it's the infrastructure. It's what you need, okay? Partners, there is no example that I can think of, maybe some of you can, of a company that does everything on their own. There used to be this concept of closed innovation, where companies kind of came up with their own ideas and inventions completely internally, and they built them and they distributed them and they supported them completely with internal resources, like full sort of cradle to grave service for companies. Doesn't exist anymore. Everyone outsources something, parts of their manufacturing, their hosting, their distribution, whatever it is. Right? So who are those partners? What do you all need? Like, what realistically can you do and bring internally? Who do you need to rely on externally? Because again, I can't And if anyone can think of one, from the big old sort of industrial companies to the sort of the new nimble, tech-driven folks that we see, to some of the sort of more human services or not-for-profits or medical, like every company relies on partnerships. So you have to understand who they are. Cost. This is one that can give folks challenges, I know from experience. That's why we're here, right? Folks that have run businesses, to help you understand what it's going to cost now and later. You've got your startup costs, right? You got your fixed costs, you got your variable costs, right? Those are kind of the three categories. You have to figure out, what am I going to need to get this thing going, right? What do I need to keep it going? And what am I going to need as I scale? You have to, it goes back to that, is the juice worth the squeeze argument. Can you generate sufficient revenue to cover what you think it's going to cost you to run the business and leave margin? Because if you come to me and say, I've got this idea and it's technology driven and it's very capable and very effective and very cool, and if everything goes perfectly in 3 years, I can have a $120,000 a year business, I'm going to discourage you from doing it, right? But if you can come and make that same argument and talk about line of sight to growing something that's meaningful from your perspective, however you define meaningful, then we're going to encourage you to do it, right? Try to give you the tools that you need to execute. So those are the 9 building blocks. And again, this presentation will be available, and that the canvas itself, just Google Business Model Canvas. There's plenty of free, downloadable, printable, like structures, frameworks of the canvas, so you can actually use it. Someone just handed me one today that had my name on it because I asked them to do it, right? It's a really effective, efficient way to create organization out of chaos, because there's just too much floating around in your collective minds, right? And this will help you prioritize and help you think about intentionally what your business is and what it could be. So I think we may have touched all this stuff. So the customer segments and value proposition as starting points is important. And I agree that there's different schools of thought for how people use it and how intentional they are about maintaining it. But if you understand who your customer is and the value that you bring to them so they'll pay you, you're off to a great start. If you can't get your arms around that, then it's probably worth spending more time evolving your concept, right? There's an alumni company that I've worked with that had a computer vision technology and was pursuing a particular market, and people liked it. And it was a slog, though. It was a really hard sell. There's a lot of quantification around what this product needed to look like and do for people to value it and want to purchase it. And so he was getting some interesting buying signals from customers, and no one was flat out saying that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard, get out of my office, right? But he switched based on some research and some customer discovery into a different market and a different manufacturing segment. And instead of people saying, hey, could you do this? Could you customize that? Could you change this? People were saying, when can I have it? Which is sort of the definition of product market fit, finding product market fit. And that's ultimately the avenue that the company is pursuing, because when people say to you, that's pretty awesome, when can I buy it? As their initial reaction, that's pretty encouraging. And that's where you get into that identifying the appropriate customer segment and articulating a quantifiable, meaningful value proposition. So, what's important is don't get too bogged down in the details. Keep this up and alive and evolving, right? Make your changes in your priorities and adding and subtracting items in time based on what's important to your customer, not what's important to you, not what's easy for you, right? Like when I teach in the first day of class, the first thing I say is, I am not here without you. You are my customer, right? That perspective works. Like, you are our customer. Without you, there's no Swartz Center, right? So the work that I do and the things that I say and the way I spend my time is focused on not what I'm interested in, but what I think you're interested in, what you tell me you're interested in. So understand your customer, okay? Solve problems for your customers. And the business model canvas will help you pinpoint what that is and help you build a meaningful strategy on what that could be and how you would do it. And that is the end of the presentation. So that's okay. Couple of takeaways, right? The presentation and the video will be up on the website. You can easily find framework business model canvases online just with a quick Google search. We use these tools. We don't just talk about them. The companies in the garage, the companies that we worked with, use them effectively, but it is exclusively for you and use it how you think it's going to benefit you, right? These are frameworks and guidelines and tips and hints and tricks and whatever you want to say. This is not gospel. You use these tools to your benefit. And if you focus on your customer, focus on delivering value to your customer in a meaningful and differentiated way, so they'll pay you, you have line of sight to building something great. So happy to answer questions, happy to hang around and talk to folks. I don't know if we have anything online, Allison, but I'm sure you're all devastated that I'm 14 minutes early. But you can get a little bit of your afternoon back as well. So thanks for your attention and good luck.